Hello learners, welcome to lecture 6 and today we'll be dealing about sociological theory of conflict theory and the family. Conflict theory provides a critical perspective on family, saying it is not a harmonious unit but is a site of inequality and power struggles. It challenges the functionalist idea of stability and consensus. Families are analyzed in terms of how they reproduce social inequalities across class, gender, and generation. This theory is strongly linked with Karl Marx's idea of power, class conflict, and resource distribution. In this lecture, we will explore how family supports systems of dominance and how conflict is maintained or resisted within the institution of family. Conflict theory emerged from Marxist sociology, emphasizing that society is structured by inequalities and conflict over resources. Unlike functionalism, which stresses harmony, conflict theory focuses on the tension and competition that define social life. Families are understood as a part of this system where resources such as wealth, authority, and opportunities are unequally distributed. Families can therefore both reproduce inequality and serve as sites of resistance. It draws attention on how class, gender, caste, and race produce unequal roles within families. Those with more power use laws, customs, and ideas to protect their advantages, and families often pass these to children through inheritance and social networks. Daily disputes over money, unpaid care work, marriage choices, or properties mirror wider power struggles in the society. Conflict theory also explains change. When less powerful groups organize, they can challenge unfair family rules and broader institutions. Researchers using this lens ask who benefits, who loses, and who controls decisions and resources inside households and kinship networks. It reminds us that families not only loving private spaces, they are all it reminds us that families are not only loving private spaces, they are also political spaces shaped by inequality and contest. The roots of conflict theory lie in the work of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx emphasized class struggle as the driving force of history. Engels specifically connected family structure to the rise of private property. He argued the nuclear family developed as a way of control inheritance and keep property within ruling classes. This view highlights how the economic system shapes family life, showing that families are not neutral but tied to power. From a conflict perspective, families function as economic units that reproduce labor for the capitalist system. Parents raise children who eventually enter the workforce. At the same time, family transmit property and wealth across generations, maintaining class inequality. Women's unpaid labor in the home sustains workers but is often unrecognized. The dependence of families on wage labor also makes them vulnerable to exploitation, keeping the capitalist system intact. When wages falls or jobs are lost, the whole household adjusts, cutting costs, pulling children from schools or taking extra work. Class, caste and gender shape who marries whom and who inherits, keeping property and status within certain groups. Migration for work turns families into support hubs. Remittances fund daily life and education, but also tie households to volatile labor markets. Household debt binds families to employers and to future wages, deepening dependence on the market. Everyday care work like cooking, cleaning, washing, childcare, and elder care lowers the cost of reproducing workers, effectively subsidizing employers. Yet, families can also resist inequality through collective saving groups, union support, shared children, and pushing for laws on equal inheritance and paid care work. Sorry. Yet, families can also resist inequality through collective saving groups, union support, shared child care, and pushing for laws on equal inheritance and paid care work. Conflict theory draws attention to power relations within families themselves. Families often have unequal authority structures traditionally dominated by men. Decision making power over finances, reproduction, and children's future is often unequally distributed. Such dynamics can reproduce gender inequality and perpetuate patriarchal systems. Even in modern times, conflict theory helps us see how families remain in arenas of negotiation, contestation, and sometimes resistance to inequality. Power shows up in everyday things: who controls money, phones, movement outside the home, and leisure time. Income, education, caste, class, and age often decide whose voice is final, with earners and elders getting priority. Control can be subtle or overt. Decisions about fertility, contraception, and daughters' education are key sites where patriarchal power is reproduced or challenged. Intergenerational dynamics matter. Parents in law, older siblings, or adult children can overrule spouses, creating layered hierarchies. Change occurs when resources and rules shift. Women's paid work, shared caregiving, legal rights to inheritance and protection, and norms of joint decision making increase bargaining power and reduce inequality. Feminist conflict theorists treat patriarchy as a power system and the family as a key site where power is produced, enforced, and learned. Women's unpaid care work, often called the second shift, subsidize men's paid work and the wider economy while remaining undervalued. Control over poverty, inheritance, mobility, and household decision making sustains male authority, and in many contexts, practices like patrilineal descent, dowry, bridal payments, or surname transmission normalize that control. Social reproduction theory argues that families daily reproduce the labor force. So, women's unpaid work quietly underwrites profits and state functioning. Intersectionality shows that gender hierarchy intertwines with class, caste, race, ethnicity, and religion, producing different vulnerabilities and privileges across groups. Empirically, time use surveys, gender disaggregated labor force participation, wage gaps, and measures of occupational segregation reveal how domestic burdens depress women's earnings and careers. Cultural meanings and symbolic violence helps make unequal arrangements feel natural. Resistance and change emerge through collective action, legal reform, and the recognition and remuneration of care work. Families can therefore be both sides of intimacy and sides of gendered conflict, with outcomes shaped by bargaining power, norms, and institutions. The core claim remains: patriarchal arrangements inside households reproduce gender inequality across generations unless challenged structurally and culturally. Families reproduce social class inequalities through the transmission of wealth, status, and opportunity. Wealthy families pass on advantages through inheritance, education, and networks. Poor families struggle to provide the same, perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. Conflict theory stresses that family structure help maintain a class hierarchy, ensuring privilege remains in the hands of a few while others are left behind. Families reproduce class through the intergenerational transfer of economic, social, and cultural capital. Money and assets, useful networks, and class match skills and taste. Wealthy households compound advantages via inheritances. Inter vivo transfers, elite school fees, and safety nets, while poorer households face constraints and economy volatility that block investment in children. Schools often amplify gaps through hidden curriculum, tracking, and fee based extras. Middle class concerted cultivation shaping different dispositions. Schools often amplify gaps through a hidden curriculum, tracking a fee based extras, middle class concerted cultivation contrasts with working class natural growth shaping different dispositions. Social networks channel internships and refers to better jobs. And assortive mating concentrates education and assets within the same class. Residential segregation ties school quality to property values, locking geographic advantages. Inflation and professional social closure consequently Credential inflation and professional social closure restrict access to top positions. Consequently, upward mobility is uneven and often stickier at the top than the bottom. From a conflict perspective, these mechanisms protect privilege. Countermeasures include progressive taxation, inheritance and estate taxes, universal high quality schooling, fair housing, and child benefits to break the cycle. Families function as consumer units that absorb wages through spending on food, house, schooling, health, and leisure, thus sustaining demand in capitalist markets. They also perform social reproduction, the daily and generational work of raising, caring for, and disciplining people so they can participate in paid labor, which include unpaid cooking, cleaning, caregiving, and emotional support. The unpaid care lowers the cost of labor for firms, while wage work anchors households to the market via rent, loans, and bills. Advertising the mass culture cultivate desires and identities organized around consumption, turning family love and aspiration into market demand. Following Karl Marx, workers' households can become a reserve army of labor, with some members moving in and out of precious jobs as firm needs them. Lewis Althusser's idea of ideological state apparatuses reminds us that schools and media help naturalize this family market link as common sense. The risk of illness, unemployment, or old age are frequently privatized to families when public welfare is weak, pushing households towards debt and multiple jobs. Gender and class shape who bears the invisible work and who benefits from the wages and status that flow from it. From a conflict perspective, this arrangement is political, not merely private, because it protects profits and reproduces class and gender hierarchies. Policy levers, public child care, parental leave, living wages, strong unions, and recognition or remuneration of care can loosen the tight grip between family life and capitalist imperatives. Conflict theory highlights how power asymmetries inside households can normalize coercion, making families sites of harm rather than harmony. Domestic violence, often termed as intimate partner violence, includes physical, sexual, psychological, and economic abuse to enforce control. Child abuse and neglect reflect similar struggles over authority, where dependence and silence make children especially vulnerable. Many offenders use coercive control. Risks are shaped by intersectionally poverty, precarious work, migration status, caste, class, and alcohol or substance misuse, which can intensify vulnerability and constrain exit options. Cultural norms about family honor, victim blaming, and fear of retaliation often suppress reporting and help maintain impunity. Violence also follows a cycle that traps survivors through hope, fear, and economic dependence. Structural responses matter. Protective laws, survivor centered policing, and courts, shelters, hotlines, and income support reduce barriers to safety. Prevention requires early education on consent and non violent conflict resolution, as well as men's engagement program that challenge entitlement and domination. In short, conflict theory insists that family violence is not a private matter. It is a political and structural problem rooted in unequal power. Families also experience conflict between generations. Parents often try to control or guide children's values, careers, and life choices. Children, however, may resist these expectations. This struggle reflects broader inequalities as older generations may control resources and property. Intergenerational conflict can reproduce inequality but can also open pathway for change when younger members challenge traditional autonomy. Racial or ethnic inequality is built into many rules and systems, not just personal bias. Because of past losses and unfair rules, some groups start this less wealth, fewer assets, and fewer chances to pass money to children. Schools in poorer areas get fewer resources, and tracking or bias can push children into lower paths. Hiring, pay, and recognition of qualifications often work against minority groups, so good jobs are harder to get. Policing, surveillance, and immigration actions can break up families or create fear, which harms work and school life. Everyday expectations, how you speak, how you dress, or fit in, often value the majority culture and discount others. Inequality can be tougher when race or ethnicity combines with class status or migration status or gender. Still, families build strength through mutual help, small businesses, and strong community networks. Real change needs fair housing and school funding, strong anti discrimination rules and policies that shift power and resources, not just nicer attitudes. Functionalism says families keep society stable. But conflict theory asks us to look for who benefits and who loses inside that harmony. It points out that what looks peaceful can be hide unequal power. For example, men over women, rich over poor, or majority over minority. Rules and routines at homes can protect privilege, not just create order. When people accept the way things are, that consent may come from pressure, fear, or lack of choices, not true agreement. Conflict thinkers ask whose voices are missing, who does the unpaid work, who decides money, mobility, and major life choices. They also note that families can pass on advantages like assets, schools, contacts, or disadvantages like debt, poor housing across generations. So, consensus is not proof of fairness. It may be maintained by coercion, tradition, or economic dependence. Seeing these hidden struggles help explain family tension, violence, and resistance, not just cooperation. The goal is not to dismiss families, but to see power clearly so change can make life fairer to everyone. Angel said the modern nuclear family grew with the rise of private property and the need to protect who inherits it. To make sure wealth went into man's biological children, so societies pushed women's sexual monogamy and tighter control over women's lives. Marriage became a legal way to control inheritance, land, and names, keeping wealth inside the male line. Women were pushed into childbearing, housework, and caregiving, most of it unpaid, while men were tied to paid work and ownership. This change created a power gap inside the home, with men holding economic power and women made dependent. Engels argued that the family therefore serves the economy, reproducing workers each day and across generations at low cost. He linked women's subordination to the property system, not to nature, and believed it could change with different social arrangements. Critics note that the family forms are diverse across cultures. But Engels is useful for showing how economics shapes family roles. Policies like equal inheritance, recognition, and pay for care work, child care services, and shared decision making can reduce the inequalities as he has described. Feminist conflict thinkers say families often give more power to men and less to women. A lot of work women do at home, cooking, cleaning, caring for children or elders, is unpaid and taken for granted. Because this work takes time and energy, women may have fewer chances to study, earn, or rise in jobs. Rules and habits in many homes make men the decision makers and women the followers. Some men use violence or threats to keep power. This is not private, it is about dominance. Media and traditions can justify these roles by calling them natural or good for the family. Feminists ask who benefits from this setup? Who pays the hidden costs? They show how gender inequality at home feeds into pay gaps, career breaks, and weak voice in public life. Change is possible through shared housework, legal protection, paid children, childcare, equal inheritance, and respectful partnership norms. Change is possible through shared housework, legal protection, paid childcare, equal inheritance, and respectful partnership norms. The key message: to make families fair, we must see and value care work, end coercion, and share power. Conflict theory helps us see how power and resources shape today's family life. Economic inequality shows up in where families can live, the schools their children attend, and whether they can afford healthcare and childcare. Rising prices, debt, and unstable jobs push stress onto homes and widen gaps between families. Divorce and custody cases often reveal power struggles. Who controls money, time, and decisions about children? Lawyers, courts, and custody rules can favor the partner with more money or social support. Same sex family challenge old ideas about what a real family is and fight for rights like marriage, adoption, and benefits. When laws or institutions deny recognition, these families face extra cost and stress, even when they provide the same love and care. Across all these issues, the question is who benefits and who is blocked by current rules, norms, and markets. Change comes from fair wages and housing, accessible childcare, equal family laws, and policies that protect all family forms, not just the traditional ones. Policies should reduce gaps between families, not widen them. Welfare that is easy to access, cash transfer, food support, rent help, and health insurance keeps children stable and in school. Paid family leave for all the parents. Lets caregivers bond with babies without losing income. Affordable childcare and after school programs help parents work and lift household earnings. Raising the minimum wage, enforcing equal pay, and offering social insurance protects families from shocks. Redistribution can come through progressive taxes, limits, or tax breaks for the rich, and fair inheritance rules so wealth is not locked at the top. Policies must include single parent, migrant, same sex, and disabled member households. One size does not fit all. Debates over these policies reflect power struggles, not pure consensus. Track results with clear measures child poverty, school attendance, parents' employment, time use equality at home. So, policies serve equity, dignity, and real family well being. Conflict theory helps us see what is unequal inside family life that polite stories often hide. It asks who has more power, money, time, and voice, and why. By doing this, it corrects ideal picture of happy families that ignore unpaid care work, control over money, or silent fear. It also connects homes to bigger systems like capitalism, patriarchy, and racism. So, private issues, housework, childcare, inheritance, divorce are also public and political questions. The lens is useful because it makes causes visible, not just symptoms. It pushes us to measure fairness and data, time use, wage gaps, asset transfers, housing access, and decision making at home. It highlights voices we miss single parents, domestic workers, migrants, LGBTQs, families, and how rules affect them. Finally, it points towards change, share power, value care work, protect rights, and redesign policies so families are fairer for everyone. Conflict theory can over focus on struggle, so it may miss everyday love, care, and teamwork in families. It often treats people as if they are only shaped by power, ignoring creativity, faith, humor, and small acts of kindness that hold homes together. It explains how inequality works, but not always why families persist or why many people still value commitment and belonging. Because it looks mostly at big pictures, it can miss the meanings and rituals families create birthdays, prayers, jokes, and shared histories. It doesn't always tell us when conflicts turn into change and when it is quietly managed or negotiated. The lens can generalize too much, overlooking cultural differences and families that share power more equally. It may underestimate upward mobility or cases where policy, education, or migration improve life across generations. On its own, it can feel one sided. Pairing it with functionalism and symbolic interactionism gives a fuller picture. Bottom line, conflict theory is powerful for spotting inequality, but we should balance it with lenses that capture care, meaning, and stability. Functionalism and conflict theory look at the same family but say different things. Functionalism says families create order. They teach values, care for members, and keep society stable. It focuses on cooperation, shared rules, and routines that help people live together. Conflict theory says families also contain power struggles over money, time, respect, and decisions. It highlights inequality and coercion, who benefits, who sacrifices, and who gets silenced. Both views are partial. Harmony without power analysis is naive. Power analysis without care and love is incomplete. Functionalism can explain why families persist and how roles support stability. Conflict theory explains who wins and who loses and how rules can be unfair. Together, they help us judge policies and practices, keeping what nurtures and change what oppresses. Conflict theory says families are not only loving places, they are places where power and resources are uneven. It helps us look beneath surface harmony to see who decides, who pays, and who benefits. Class, gender, and race shape everyday rules about money, care, freedom, and respect. By naming these patterns, we can explain why some advantage and harms repeat across generations. This lens does not reject family, it asks us to see it clearly so we can make it fairer. Good analysis joins stories with evidence, time use data, wage gaps, inheritance, housing access, and custody outcomes. Seeing the structure behind private life turns personal problems into public questions that policy can change. Keep what nurtures love, care, commitment, and challenge what silences or exploits. Next, we move to feminist perspective, which sharpen the focus on gendered power in housework, decision making, and violence, and point to practical change for equality in the next lecture. Thank you for this.